there's a reason that we invited these amazing panelists here, and that when we decided on the topic of executive presence, we were very purposeful in who we selected. So George Sparks, who many of you, if you've been in Colorado, you know George, you've seen him. George is currently the CEO of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. What's really cool, though, is George started, one of the smartest guys, you guys. He has a master's degree, I think 2, from MIT, right?
Just 1.
Oh, just 1. Slack, in aeronautics. And then he was, imagine this, a Top Gun Air Force pilot and instructor. Should call you Maverick, right? Absolutely. And he also was an executive for HP and Agile Technologies. Did I remember that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we thought about executive presence, we were thinking of who in our community really exemplifies that, especially in the nonprofit space. And George came to mind immediately. Now, Byron Haselden, I have been fortunate enough to work with Byron and his team for almost a decade now, I think. And all of you, whether you realize it or not, have been touched by his company, and a lot of who are here today have been touched by his company, whether you've gone to UC Health or tried to navigate through DIA. That, I don't know if we should thank you or not for that. Maybe they could give us the inside scoop on that private city where the aliens hide underneath DIA. But when I think about executive presence, and I was thinking about my clients, Byron came to mind immediately, because there's something about him that just exudes what now we're considering executive presence, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what that is. One of the things that's different about Byron than a lot of other CEOs, especially in construction companies, is the way that he holds himself out, the empathy he has for his people, the way that he leads, and it's something that I've been very fortunate enough to watch for almost a decade now. So that's Byron. Now, Donna Lynne, a lot of you probably know her, which is really wonderful because she's really helped shape Colorado. Donna is currently the CEO of Denver Health. Before that, it was politics. She was lieutenant governor under Hickenlooper, and I think the COO at the time as well, correct?
Chief Operating Officer.
Yep, Chief Operating Officer for the state of Colorado, and then before that was Kaiser. All right with that? Before that was Kaiser. But my favorite thing about Donna, and the thing that impresses me the most, and that I am extremely jealous of, she's got her own Wikipedia page. How lucky is that? I have tried, and they won't let me put up a Wikipedia page. So that is impressive in itself. Now let's go back to the topic of executive presence. I spend the majority of my days doing one-on-one executive coaching, including quite a few of you guys that are here, and women, I shouldn't say guys, that was really bad, but quite a few of you people who are in the room today. And almost without fail, people come to me for 2 main reasons. One of them is definitely executive presence. If you think about your own self, if you think about some of the feedback perhaps that you've been given, and maybe you got this, maybe you were in a performance review and you're like, your manager looked at you and said, you need to work on your executive presence. Or maybe you were a CEO and your board pulled you aside, the chair pulled you aside and said, you are public facing now. We need you to up your executive presence. So what do? You smile and say, thank you, may I have another? And you walk away and you're like, what the hell does that mean? That's what we're going to answer today. So we're going to talk about what executive presence means in today's world, how it's changed, and then, most importantly, what are some tactics and techniques that all of you can display once you leave here? Sound good? All right. So, you know what, Donna, since you're sitting next to me, why don't you start us off? If somebody came to you and was like, Donna, I was told I have to work on my executive presence. Help me understand, what does that mean? What would you tell them?
So I did cheat a little, I'm going to confess, because I went and Googled executive presence because there's a famous Supreme Court decision about pornography, and one of the justices said, I can't describe it, but I know when I see it what it is. So executive presence is somewhat similar. But the Harvard Business Review helped me put it into 3 buckets, which I like to talk about. So one is what we call gravitas, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second is appearance, and the third's communication. From the gravitas perspective, it could be things like your resume, what you do. Certainly in Colorado, I've found, having lived in New York and Colorado, how you stand up, and I think it's true for the three of us, outside of your day-to-day job. It is participating in boards. It's being involved in organizations that maybe aren't even connected to what you do, but create a sense not only of you as an individual, but also that your company wants to be a good citizen. And I think that's really important. I think the three of them blend together really well: gravitas, appearance, and communication, and I'll describe that. Appearance can be very traditional and sometimes staid. When I first moved to Colorado, somebody said, "Why are you always wearing black suits?" Well, that was what I did in New York. And then they said, "Well, you need to lighten it up." And then at some point somebody said, "Well, you went too far." And I think, unfortunately, women, we get judged very differently than men in terms of that appearance issue. But certainly you have to have a commanding presence, and that flows into communication from my perspective. I think we've loosened some of the rules around appearance, whether it was COVID, whether it's a newer generation. Many of us have a closet full of suits. I always say I have two speeds: suits and hiking clothes. There's only two. There's nothing in between. But we've definitely gotten a little more relaxed when it comes to how people dress and how they're judged. But to me, the most important element is communication. And communication, as I said, sort of bleeds into appearance and it bleeds into gravitas. And the sort of basics around communication are, of course, speaking clearly, speaking with conviction, speaking with confidence, but also speaking with humility and oftentimes humor. Because we're used to sort of putting on our game face in the morning when you're in an executive role, and you need to not take yourself so seriously. I'm a big believer in that. Being at work 10 hours a day means you also have to have some fun. You also have to give people permission to engage differently, not just about the business of what you have to tackle every day, because as you heard from Shannon, and I deal, even though I'm not in HR, yes, there are crazy people working for us. It's pretty amazing. But we have to be clear, and I make it a point as a CEO to communicate both in writing with everybody in the organization, but also through a variety of town halls where I'm open to feedback. And I think maybe that's the last thing, and I'll let others talk, but being open to feedback is really critical. I always say, I've often used the word loving critic. So the feedback that is given to me, or the feedback that I give to leaders in my organization, is out of a spirit of being better for the organization. It's not done in a punitive or a nasty way. So I will summarize the three elements to me of executive presence: gravitas, appearance, and communication.
Right. And did you like what she just did? How she had her message, she explained it a little bit, and then she reiterated her message. One of the things about executive presence is the communication piece is that conciseness as well. But add just a couple more things. Donna also mentioned humility. It was buried in there, but it's been my experience, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit, humility is such an important part of executive presence. And I mean, Byron, your industry, especially the construction industry, has changed so much over the years. What do you see as the main changes with regards to executive presence?
Mm-hmm. So when we, and welcome and excited to be here, so thank you all, it's great to meet you. Executive presence, when I first heard the word and the three of us were talking about it, and four of us talking about it, I had to really think about, what was the definition, and so it took a minute, and I think another word might be style, and it comes in so many different varieties, but when it comes to construction, it's changed a lot, and we have something in our industry, that's kind of termed old school, and I think the construction industry has always been kind of rough and tumble, but over the years, as I was in the field, I was superintendent for 10 years and have seen how it's changed over the years, and humility has really come to play, where I think if you can meet people on their level, whether that's a carpenter that works for us in the field and is struggling, to day to day and put meals for his family at home, or all the way up, to a vice president or CFO or CEO, you have to adjust your style. And one thing that we do in our company is what's called situational leadership. And I really try to practice that humility and really meet people at where they are in their lives. And I think for construction, if you aren't doing that today, and I think FirstBank is an awesome organization, you look at the longevity of the people that have worked here, where they really are meeting people at where they need to be in their careers, in their lives, and then growing them. And we've had folks that have worked for us for 30, 35 years, and they continue to come back and want to be with us because we really care for our people. And I think when I took over the business, our business is a family business, started by my dad in 1973. My brothers ran it for a while, now I'm running it. There's next generation coming in, and you have to change with the times and look at what's around you. And I think that's the executive presence, to be aware of what the people need and try to meet them.
I love that. And I assume part of that situational awareness is also the poise that is needed. Because when we talk about executive presence, oftentimes, when we think about somebody that has the poise. So it's not just, and construction is a great example, it's not just the person that has the title. They have to have the passion, but are they able to use it in a way that other people can understand? Can they control their expression, and can they control it? And that's one thing, Byron, that I've noticed that you do really well, is you have that passion, but you have it controlled and you express it in the right way. So just want to give you kudos in front of all these people for that. We didn't plan that, I promise. Byron's like, thank you. Let's move on a little bit to social media, right? I mean, now we're in a world where social media is everywhere, whether we like it or not. Byron, if you don't mind me pick on you again, how does social media, how does executive presence get impacted, or does it impact social media?
Yeah, what I've noticed with social media, we used to, in our business, really not feel like you needed to rely on it very much to go win a project, to build a building. And I think where it's become more evident is again with the people. And so what's really important to a lot of our new interns that are coming into the business, they're coming out of college, they want to be recognized on Instagram, on LinkedIn. They want to make sure, so I really try when we have interns to make sure I connect with them, or when they enter into what we call a CMAP program, which is a Construction Management Associate program. So we put them in a training program for those first 3 years. And that's a little hard for them because they don't necessarily have a title yet. And so just recognizing them, and I think it's important. We talked a lot about social media. You don't even necessarily need a post, but they need a like. And that has, even for my generation, that didn't exist, and I think it's become a lot more prominent today.
That's good. And I mean, Donna, let's even expand the definition to online presence. What do you think about that and how it impacts executive presence?
Well, I think certainly a lot of us use social media for connecting with friends, and I kind of draw a line around, there aren't pictures of me in a bathing suit or doing something inappropriate at Red Rocks. But there might be, things that enhance and make people think I'm something other than the CEO of an organization. So communicating that you have outside interests, you have family, I think that's a good part of rounding you out. And I like, at work, people will tell you, I like to tell stories. I try not to make them too long because people get impatient. But storytelling about something you did, I think, really humanizes you and connects you to people. On the flip side, though, the business side, we do have a pretty significant social media presence as an organization. It helps recruit people. It helps people understand what are the current issues that we're facing as an organization. It helps promote things that we want to hear in the public. So I'm fortunate. I have to confess, I don't do that, but I do have a wonderful person who happens to sit here in the audience who does that for me and helps me think about what we want to promote. And it could be, we just had Suicide Awareness Day this week, and that's an important public health issue as well as an issue Denver Health deals with its patients. Overdose awareness, so we will promote social issues as well as things that are about our organization.
That's great. That is good. And George, you had a really good example, a story. Would you mind telling it? We were talking about online presence and how it impacted you and somebody else.
What was the story? That was a high presence moment.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I think his name was Job.
Oh, Job. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't do social. I lurk on social media because I want to know what's happening. So I follow everything, and I'll give people likes, but I won't go in there and comment because for me, there's only downside. Only bad things are going to happen if I go in and start commenting on things. And you see it in our political system today. But I try to connect with people on LinkedIn if I have any sort of a connection at all. And there was this guy on there named Job, and I connected with him, and somehow he sent me a message, and he said, "I'm homeless." And I thought, well, to start with, who names their kid Job? There's got to be a story there somewhere. So I invited him in for lunch. And he came in for lunch, and turns out he was a project manager at CH2M Hill and a bunch of other places. Very well-educated, articulate guy. He lost his job during COVID, and he got a divorce, lost the house, and he was living from bedroom to bedroom, and he had a computer so he could get on social media. And I just fell in love with the guy. And I started helping him get interviews with places. He started, now he walks runways. He's a model. He has a really unique beard and facial structure and everything. And so we stay in contact. He calls me up, sends me emails and everything. He's moving back east. He got a job back east. So I felt like I made a friend there just through some fluky thing. And as we're sitting at the first meeting, I thought, hope he's not an axe murderer or something like that. They'll find my body in here, and Job was here on my whiteboard. But you never know, and those personal connections can come from wherever they come from.
Yeah,
And to me, that's what it's all about, is connecting with each other as human beings. It's not what you look like. I looked up executive presence in Google, and it said, impressing people with your appearance and manners. And I thought, well, I'm screwed. So, there's got to be something more to this. And I really think it is about that personal connection.
Except I want to tell a story about George, because this shows you the human that he is, how kind he is. I moved to Colorado 19 years ago, and I didn't know anybody. And I was at an event, and it happened to be my birthday. George was, I think you were either being honored, you were the moderator, and he stood up and said, there's somebody new here, and you should all meet her. And her name is Donna, Lynne, and it's her birthday. And I will never forget that for the rest of my life. And it was also just a way of showing how welcoming Colorado is, but how he took his time to recognize somebody else. So thank you.
Wow, that's so sweet. That is so nice. So that human connection, when we talk about executive presence, this is the type of discussion that we would not have had 5-10 years ago when we talked about executive presence, because 5 or 10 years ago it was more of that commanding. It was more of that, and that's how I grew up as well. I'm a former lawyer. And as a matter of fact, I mean, Byron, I don't know if you're going to be more embarrassed about this or I am, but look at the difference. Do you mind? Can we do this? All right. And you have heels on. I have heels on. So, 10 years ago, who would have had the executive presence? It would have been him, right? And even today, sometimes, so I do most of my all my executive coaching is always done via Zoom. And it's fascinating when people meet me for the first time. Guess what they usually say? Fortunately, Ricky didn't do this today, which was surprising, but normally this is what they usually, what do you think they usually say? Yes! I thought you were taller!
I thought you were.
And you know what I'm thinking in my head? I'm not going to say it out here because we're talking about executive presence, but it just goes to show that used to be executive presence. And Donna and I were laughing because there are studies that show, how many of you, by the way, are here under 5 feet? I'm the only one? Well, how about 5'5"? Who's under 5'5"? All right, and Molly, you're not going to like this. Sylvia, you're under 5'5"? Oh, okay. Oh, you shrunk. Everybody looks tall to me. What we were laughing about is there are studies out there that showed that your height determines your salary. Right? OMG. It used to be the case. But executive presence now, it's not like that. And it's hard, especially those of us that are more of the introverted side in the past. Now, as we're seeing with George being such a great example, that's not the case. And so, George, if you can give some advice, if you don't mind, for people who perhaps they don't have that innate coming in the room and just exuding that charisma, what advice do you have for them?
Well, how many of you are introverts here? Okay.
You always have our hands are low.
So, used to be, I remember the first time I took the Myers-Briggs test, and I wanted to be a driver more than anything in the world, and I was devastated when I came back as a hard introvert. And I thought, it's over. I have no chance of succeeding in business. But all it says is that whether you get energy or give energy through interaction with humans. Hickenlooper is an extraordinary extrovert. I mean, he lives off that energy. But I'm an introvert, and I can play an extrovert, and I love people, but it just sucks energy out of me. Yesterday, we had a ribbon cutting at the museum. We had 1,000 people there last night, and I went home, and I just crashed. Just completely crashed. I loved it, but I crashed. So you have to be able to, I don't want to say fake it, but you have to be able to understand that, just let me back up a second. When I coach kids about how to succeed in life, I say that there's one rule. If you figure this rule out, life will be a lot easier and you'll be a lot more successful. It ain't about you. It's about everybody else. You're not the main character in this film. You're here to serve other people. And once you do that, it becomes easy to know, I'm doing this for you. I'm not doing it for me. Yeah. That's how I make it as an introvert. And frankly, it never gets in the way. I had this conversation last night with somebody at the ribbon cutting. He couldn't believe that I was an introvert.
Yeah. So I'm going to push you a little bit on this if you don't mind, but let's talk about then networking. Because let's be honest, you guys, some of you are here for networking. It's a great topic, great panelists, but there's also some networking involved in here. What advice do you have for people in networking situations that walk in the room and don't really know anybody?
Yeah, so the best thing that ever happened to me is when I was in the Air Force, teaching at the Air Force Academy, left the Air Force and joined HP, and one of the most consequential things in my life is I joined in sales. And in sales, for an introvert, you really have to learn how to engage with people. So I just developed the skills of going up to somebody and saying, "Hi, hey, I'm George, what do you do?" And start to learn a little bit about them and about them as people, not about their job necessarily, but about them as people. And it's amazing. It's just like Job, This guy's a friend of mine now, and that never would have happened unless I had some interest in him. And the word empathy came up earlier. You mentioned empathy. If you're curious about somebody, it's a heck of a lot easier to have empathy for them. And I'm always amazed that I'll have an hour meeting with somebody, and I'll know everything about them when they leave, and they will never have asked me anything about me. And that doesn't bother me personally, but it tells me about them that they don't, I'm not sure exactly what it tells me, but it's always interesting that I know so much about them, and it's a skill. It's a skill you can learn. You don't have to really, it does help if you really want to know about them because you're not faking it. But that empathy and curiosity, I found that those two things go together.
That's great. And that actually was a good challenge for all of you here today. My challenge is, at the end of our program, stick around, find somebody you don't know, and see if you can discover something about them. Now, everybody's going to be asking each other questions. Nobody's going to want to answer them, but see what you can do, and see if you can take George up on that amazing advice. Thank you. And speaking of advice, we look around the room, and almost everybody here is pretty senior. But even if you're senior, we still need help. So Byron, would you mind sharing what advice do you have for people, whether they're emerging leaders or otherwise, of how to cultivate executive presence?
Something I learned early on is listening, and I think there's that awkward moment of silence too, and I think more people often feel like if there's a long pause, I need to say something, and I think more times than not, that's just probably in your head, and that pause is not as long as you think it is, and if you'll wait a little bit and let the other person talk first, I think then you can start to really learn a lot more about what they want versus maybe what you want. And So just shut up, you know.
That is good, because I'll ask all of you this. How many of you have more of an analytical style, meaning you really like to think about things and to process before you talk, or you just need to think before you act? A show of hands? Okay. So look around. No, keep your hands up, because I want everybody to look around the room. Keep your hands up. These are the people you would honor and respect. You can put them down now, thank you. That you would honor and respect by giving them that 5-second pause. So thank you, that's wonderful. That's great, thank you. Let's see, who else? George, you actually offered to give advice here as well.
On the engaging and networking?
Sure, we covered it.
I'll do younger.
On the advice, okay, all right, Donna's gonna save you.
Yeah, I was just enthralled listening here.
Well, I think, and it was interesting, it was in the article that I read about executive presence, that the original work was done in 2012. And then it was a look back today, given that the boomers, people like me and George, you're not a boomer, are you yet?
No,
You're not.
yet.
You're a youngster. You know, we sometimes hold on to our positions, and that's okay, because we have lots of history and lots of knowledge, but I firmly believe it's our responsibility to cultivate the next generation of leaders, and I have my eye on people, and I think it's more than one person, because I think that's a responsibility to whether it's your board or whoever is going to be making decisions. And sometimes that means giving people who aren't as experienced, of course, or maybe who are younger, from a different generation, the coaching, the exposure, and also learning that their values sometimes are different than yours. And so that takes an adjustment. As I mentioned, clothing. You know, clothing was much more traditional when I was, growing up. You had just a closet full of suits. That's changed a little bit, and that's okay. Sometimes values about work-life balance. I always say, work-life balance, what's that? There is no such thing. It's just work. But a lot of younger generation are much more interested in that work-life balance. It creates some struggles sometimes at work, but I think we have to acknowledge we're seeing a very different mindset when it comes to work-life balance, and certainly more women being in the workforce, and not the traditional woman who stayed home. So I try to think about and expose myself to younger people as well, to learn about them and how that's going to influence the next generation of leaders.
I love that, and I love how it's also teaching you how to adapt your style as well. Because when we talk about executive presence, like anything, it's kind of dynamic, right? It's what's executive presence today is going to be different than next year probably. So how do you get feedback, Donna, since you're engaging with me? How do you get feedback on what you need to dial up or dial down?
I'm running some risks because there's a few people that work for me here.
Me too.
Afterwards, I'm going to say, she's so full of it. Well, I mean, we use a tried and true tool, which is a 360. So I report to a board, and the board does a 360 on me for the board members as well as my direct reports. And I take that very seriously. We also just finished we do an employee engagement survey. We just finished that, and that certainly gave me an indication of how was my team feeling about my leadership styles, places that I could improve. So I love those things, and I'm open to feedback. The chair of my board says to me, though, why do you always want to go to the negative, Donna? You get embarrassed by the positive. And I wonder if that's maybe a female trait as well. We've talked a little bit about resumes. I think you're going to get there. But I love the feedback and work pretty directly with my board, one-on-one as well as a group, on ways that I can better serve them, and then hopefully in turn my leadership team.
That is great. What about you, Byron? How do you get feedback?
I don't think I get enough feedback. I mean, I get some tough love from family when you're, when you're in a family business with two older brothers, but maybe a little bit from my board. I always have said, open door policy and encourage people to come talk to me. I hate the status quo. I think things always need to be, changing and improving. But it's a really good question. We do participate in a work survey through the Denver Post, and they have a CEO section, and that's helpful. But I think it's actually tough when you're at a CEO level to get honest, good, quality feedback. Just because of the dynamics. So.
Yeah. You agree with that too, George?
Well, I was going to say, I do a lot of presentations, and what I monitor is, does anybody say, I remember this, or somebody will come up 6 months later and say, I remember that speech you gave here, that really impressed me. So then I know I'm at least doing okay. Yeah. I also have an executive assistant, Kelly Southern, who will tell me everything.
She runs the museum,
I'm just saying. Advisor who will tell you, you shouldn't have said it that way. You should have said it this way, who I completely and totally trust. Because people when you're the boss, they don't really give you the honest feedback. So you got to figure out some techniques to ferret it out.
Yeah, that's good. With executive presence, it's not just, of course, about you and you showing up as being the person in charge, the CEO, but it's also about cultivating credibility and trust throughout the organization. So do any of you have any ideas or any tactics you can share with the rest of the group? How do you cultivate that trust using your executive presence?
Well, I can tell you, actually, as an organization, we just went through, about a year ago, a strategic planning process. And, to sort of, with me being relatively new, I wanted to revisit where are we going and how can we give people a clear sense. And what was amazing, through a very collaborative process, we had, out of 8,400 employees that we have at Denver Health, we had a couple thousand that participated one way or another in town halls and the ability to send us little notes. And the word that came back was trust. Really? That we had an aspiration, because healthcare organizations always say things like high quality, great service, affordability. And we ended up adopting, and my lanyard is in my bag, but it says most trusted. And that, for us, I think resonates because we want to trust each other as colleagues. We want our patients to trust us, and we want the outside world to trust us in what we do. So we got a lot of feedback around that trust was just really critical to our work. And we create a lot of forums for people to give us feedback. Are we accomplishing that? And we have concrete metrics that talk about that. But underlying it all is really trust, as well as some other organizational values.
Wow, that is wonderful. How about either of you? How do you use executive presence to cultivate trust?
Something I started about 10 years ago. Troy Schroeder, who's our CFO here, raise your hand, Troy. Troy and I were on a one-year executive leadership program through a guy named Tommy Spalding, and we saw Ken Blanchard, who's written a lot of the One-Minute Managers, and came up with the idea of what I call a Mindful Monday. And so I put out a Mindful Monday recording every Monday morning, which talks about thoughts and prayers for folks that might be struggling with something in their life, some kind of recognition that's happened in the company, and then a quote. And ironically, when I did it, I didn't think about how it could affect in reverse for me, but I think it's developed a lot of trust because I've started to learn people's lives a lot more, and especially when they've lost a loved one or they're struggling with a child or something like that. And so that ended up building a trust at more of a personal relationship with folks when I see them than necessarily just a working relationship. And I really enjoy it, and I take the time to really try to seek out information of what's going on out there with all of our employees.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So yesterday we had some of our old trustees came back, and a 90-year-old trustee was on the hiring committee that hired me. Well, I feel like he's my brother. We were sitting there chatting, and he goes, I still remember the first day you came to work, and you and I were walking down the hall, and I was asking you about the museum and expecting you to tell me all this stuff, and I was telling you everything needed to be fixed, and all of a sudden you were gone. It's like, where the heck did he go? And I'd peeled off, and I was talking to a volunteer, trying to just get to know a volunteer. He said, I will never forget that moment that you did that. So whenever I walk through the museum, any employee or volunteer I see, I always say hi to them, or try to just have a brief conversation with them. And when I left today, I went by the visitor desk and said, hey, I'm going off to a seminar on executive presence. What would you like me to tell them? And the guy said, tell them we want free pizza. So I have fulfilled my job to them, and I'll go back to them and tell them that I delivered the message for free pizza. But again, it's all back to that personal thing. If they believe that you care about them, you care about the mission, I'm not sure it's much more difficult than that. If they feel you're phony or you're faking it, then it's hopeless.
Yeah, well, that was great. Well, before we open it up to questions, I want to end with one question for each of you. And that is, what advice do you have for people that are looking to increase their executive presence?
She's raising her eyebrow.
Should I? Okay, according to my notes, George, you're up first.
Let's start down here.
So the thing is, there are no formulas. Read the books, read the articles, talk to people about it. You just have to develop. It's your deal, and you have to be genuine. It has to be whatever you believe in. Otherwise, it's going to come across as phony. And it's not. You want to address. I have to tell you this story, by the way, because this just blew me away. Last night I was leaving the restaurant after having dinner with my grandkids, and I'm wearing this coat, and I walk across the street down in Glendale, and this young woman who is Latina, I don't know, 22, 23 years old, looks over at me and goes, nice suit. I go, whoa, thank you. That really made me feel good. And that again, that human connection that just, go out of your way to have somebody know that they see you as a human being.
Yeah.
And that comes across, whatever executive presence that is, that helps.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I think I'm next on your list, aren't I?
Yes, thank you. I peeked you.
I vividly remember my first job, and getting out of college and graduate school and not having a clue what the work world would look like, because I waitressed or I lifeguard. I mean, I did all those things in the summer, and sitting in my first meeting and thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I know I think I'm really smart because I have these 2 degrees, but what am I doing here? And I remember that watching, for a period of time, understanding your environment. And I've had multiple jobs in Colorado and in New York City, and each one has a different culture. And what you can say or what you can do is often influenced by that culture. So I'm going to tell you a quick funny story. So when 51 years living in New York City, I moved to Colorado, and I'm at Kaiser, which is a wonderful organization, and we have a meeting, and someone says, how's the temperature in the room? So I'm looking for the thermostat all over, and there wasn't a thermostat. So someone says, well, I'm feeling really good about this meeting. And the next person says, I don't know, I didn't like what Susie said. And I thought, oh my God, this isn't real, is it? But it was. And so I realized, I am a driver. I always want results. I'm often impatient, but I needed to adapt to that culture. And so whether you're trying to emerge into leadership or you are the leader, just taking the temperature of the room is sometimes very important.
Great advice. Thank you. All right, Byron?
I would say smile and shake people's hands. And, my dad taught me to always look them in the eye. And I still think there's something about that. I think that first impression with people is really important. And it sets the tone. I don't know if anybody watched the debate last night, but there was a very, very, very started off with a handshake. And I thought that was interesting. And so I just think there's this instantaneous moment that person is developing, maybe unconsciously, what they're thinking about you, and you only have a second, to do that, and then from there, I think it's more listening, and then I always encourage people to ask questions.
Good.
You can't ask enough questions. So.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice from all 3 of you. And what questions do you have? Yes.
I'm Nancy Sharp, and I work with Donna at Denver Health. I'm really curious as to how So George and I were having a conversation before the program started, and it's so striking to me that with age comes life experience, comes perspective, comes wisdom. So many valuable, tangible assets for any organization, and yet age is seldom really appreciated.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how age can be a strategic asset.
Yeah, great question. And the HR people in the room are going, because ageism is real. I mean, that discrimination is real.
And if we're not getting older, we're going downwards, which is not a good place to be. So.
I think sometimes it can actually be the opposite too, right? So if you might be perceived as younger for the role that you're in, I think sometimes it actually can be the reverse as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know I have a very hard time using remote controls. I just, I mourn for the day when you could walk up to the TV and there were 4 channels and you pressed a button. So there definitely are some attributes that young people have. That's mostly what I ask my kids to do. I do think you may have, some of you may have read this amazing book called Caste by Isabel Wilkinson. And almost the very last line is, the newest caste is age. And it really shook me up. And I do think what I try to do, because I am a boomer, is I try to act like somebody else, like some other age group. So I do crazy things. You know, I climb mountains, I ski, I have tattoos, I do all these things so I can say to young people, I'm very cool. You have no idea. And actually I'm cooler than most of the young people that I know, because they wouldn't do some of the things that I do. But I do think it is really important, to your point, Nancy. Look, and we did, you mentioned the presidential debate, and I have said to some of the people on my staff, if I glaze over and start to not remember things, that's when you have permission to tell me, you might want to go to part-time right now and tell the board to start a new search. But I never want to be in that place where I'm not as strong, as tough, as engaged as I feel like I am right now. So I think letting go is really important for us. As I said, I always say the first responsibility of a new leader is to find their replacement.
Yep.
And I really believe that.
Yep. There's no success without succession. What other questions do you have? Oh, thank you, Kelly. Go ahead.
Yeah. I have found in the years, when I look at executive leaders that I highly respect, there's an art in saying no. So any words of advice of how somebody comes to you with a unique idea, but it's not viable. Somebody comes to you with a suggestion. What is the art of saying no while honoring authenticity?
So
I'm really bad at it.
The best definite model of leadership that I've ever found was the U.S. Army. There's only 3 things. First one is accomplish the mission, because if you don't do that, nothing else matters. Take care of the troops, and then create new leaders. And so always come back to the mission. Will this help us accomplish the mission? It might be great, but it doesn't fit in the budget. We'll take a chance on some things. Somebody has to be able to say yes or no. And one of the values at the museum that we have, which are the values that I love more than any we've ever had, because usually they're integrity and respect and stuff like that could mean anything. We have one that says think critically and act with empathy. So this think critically part is always key when you're making those kind of yes or no decisions. But then once you decide, being empathetic with the people that you either have to let go, change jobs, cut the budget, or just plain say no to them. And that has served us so well over time, that think critically and act with empathy.
Yeah, I like that. So tying it to the business need, and then, but also having respect and honoring what their needs are as well.
Right.
I like that. Thank you. Great question, Kelly. Thank you.
I think what I'm observing is vulnerability. You guys are all sharing stories that really kind of show who you are and
you're vulnerable. And I do think sometimes earlier in your career, there's pressure to fit a certain mold, not maybe be your total authentic self. So any advice on how you kind of bring your authentic self to work, but also maintain the professionalism that's expected as you move up in the environment?
Yeah, I love that word. It's actually one of our values. And I think by showing vulnerability, you then end up making a stronger connection, to someone. And I think so many times vulnerability is viewed as weak, but actually it's a strength, because if you kind of break through that wall sometimes that people put up because they don't want to be vulnerable, then I think once you go down that road, you create such a much richer, deeper connection with someone, whether that's at work or in life, that is just so much more meaningful, when you actually can achieve it. It's not always easy to get there very fast, because it takes a lot of trust, because you're letting your guard down. But in our company, the faster you can get there, and that pure one word or value or behavior is what it really is, really deepens that trust, especially in construction. I mean, you have to trust each other every day for what we do. So
I'll share with you a story. I moved here in 2005 from New York. I had 3 kids that lived in New York, and it was this great challenge and adventure. On my second day of work, I had a all-hands meeting. There were 1,000 people in an auditorium, and I get a phone call. I don't think it was a text at that point, and it was your boss, who was a woman, the first woman I ever worked for. Your boss was fired. And I had 1,000 people staring at me, and I told them the story, and I teared up, which, as women, we hate tearing up. It is just terrible, right? And then I told them what had happened, and then I proceeded to go through the presentation, and I walked off the stage, and one of the people who worked for me said, I know you've only been here 2 days, but I know this was your finest moment by sharing your vulnerability.
Yeah. And Kelly, that was a wonderful question. And, I always like to tell people when we're working on confidence that, confidence is knowing you can handle anything that comes your way. So showing that vulnerability, but also showing that you can handle it is what's critical there. Thank you. Molly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I am a chief people officer, and I tear up a lot. Like, it's actually kind of a joke at most of the companies I work with. But I get also the same comments of, I appreciate your vulnerability and your humanness. And I don't always like being human. I found out I'm not a horrible avenger. But what I hear from you all is intentionality coupled with vulnerability and empathy. And I designed a leadership training on intentionality, and one of the things it takes you to is defining your legacy. So at the end of the day, God forbid, we have a funeral, and all our coworkers and our employees and our family members, whoever show up, how is it we want to be remembered? Because I find in leadership, most of us get into it either reactively, we are the tallest person in the room or the shortest person in the room, or it's a cool title. I don't think many people wake up and say, this is the leader I want to be someday. We do that learning along the way. And then unfortunately in retrospect, we're like, oh, that's where I wanted to be. This is where I am today. If you were to define your legacy, your leadership legacy, what would that be today? How is it that you want to be remembered today?
Thank you, Molly. Does anybody want to put thought into this?
I went back to, I grew up in southern West Virginia, a little coal mining town. I went back there a couple weeks ago and I said, here's the bridge where I want to throw half my ashes off and the other half atop of Peak 10 in Breckenridge. So I got that part covered. But what I don't want is, I told my family, I don't want a funeral, I don't want any of this, I don't want anything. To me, the thing, in my mind, the model is 10 years after I'm gone, 2 folks meet in a bar and they're going, whatever happened to old George? And he goes, well, I think he passed away. And one of them says, he made a difference to me.
Yeah.
Not that he made a difference to the museum or Colorado, he just made a difference to me. And that's all I want him to say. And for me, that's what I want my legacy to be.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Do either of you want to respond?
It's hard to top. Thanks, George.
All right.
I had something, but I'm not going there.
No, that's good. And actually, with one of the first things that I do with coaching is have people really think about that. How do you want to be described?
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in previous executive voices. So those of you that have been here for a while, and I know there's a few of you that have been here. This is every single one we've ever done. So I appreciate you guys being here for that. Do you have a question as well, Julie?
I have a question. So you all seem like people-oriented leaders, which is amazing. I wonder how you take that executive presence to like your board or maybe somebody that you ultimately report to. I think that's a little bit of a different relationship than maybe the people that you lead.
Good question, generally.
Managing up.
What gets done to us, we do to others.
I really try to be authentic and calm, because especially in a family business, sometimes my brothers and I can really get at it. And what I've learned probably growing up with family though too, and with people in general, if you escalate it up, they're escalating it right there with you. And so I really try to keep especially if it's a difficult conversation, be very clear on what I'm going to say and make sure I write that down before I go in, and then stick to the facts. Don't get wandering, because then you're going to lose your audience, and then conclude it, and then be quiet, and listen.
I try to treat my board the way I want my team to treat me. So the famous expression, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So I don't want to hear a long explanation about something and then it's dumped on my lap, and I try not to do that with my board. I would say 80% of the time I've already got the solution in mind with them. And then the other 20% is real engagement and thinking out loud. I tend to reserve that more for my chair and for a very small executive committee versus the entire board that, flies in once a month and they're worried about their day jobs as well. So I think that's the approach that I take.
That's great.
Yeah, I think a combination of these two. And just be honest. The worst thing is to try to bullshit them.
Yeah.
Treat them as real professionals and as human beings, and leave a little humor in there with them as well.
That's great.
And I love my board. I respect them. Donna's
You better.
when she came back to Colorado, we plotted how to get her back on our board here. So we are blessed with an extraordinary board, and I would do anything for any of them.
That's great. Great question, Julie. Thank you. Yes, Mark.
You somewhat touched on this in the discussion about social media, but I'm curious about how you view the value and the value of presenting your executive presence through the messaging of the institutions you lead. I want to add that I'm a good friend of Jackie Montgomery, your Chief Communications Officer, so whatever your answer is, I can call it. At what way do you do that? And the other part of this is, to what degree do you lead it? To what degree do you take advice about how you should have that presented?
So it's funny, when I came to Denver Health 2 years ago, we didn't have a chief communications officer. I was horrified. We had outsourced it, and I try not to always do I'm doing it better than the person before me, but I view communications, community relations, government affairs as being essential to our success, because we're a big employer in the community and we serve the community. So we had outsourced communications to a firm in Chicago and somebody who sat on a screen. And that was literally the first thing I did was I fired them and I started a search to find someone. I really think that, again, we're judged by, and George and I are very close and we intersect on a lot of boards, and I think people's impressions of the organization is often created by the executive and how they show up and what they are willing to do to serve the community in addition to serve their job. And social media is a way, in addition to the boardroom, social media is a way, as I said, talking about whether it's suicide awareness or overdose awareness or talking about your values with respect to the LGBT community, the kinds of services that you provide is a way to create that image in a much, at a much bigger scale than just I run around like crazy on a bunch of boards or some of my team does. So I love social media and its capabilities for doing that.
Yeah. And the online presence piece, Byron, you do a good job with that with your Monday messaging, having your video out to the whole organization like that. So is there any techniques or any advice you want to give to us about online presence?
I think executive presence online is difficult. I almost question if we're a real advocate about bringing people back to work, and we want them, in the we can't build buildings online, and that's a whole other topic about work from home or coming back in. But I think it's really hard to have executive presence online. I think for you two, as much as your social media compared to like what we do, I think honestly we could do a better job on our communication and just being part of my family goes back 3 generations in Colorado, and so I'm conscientious of just being part of the community, but I think a lot more people could do that no matter what your business is.
Yeah, that personal connection.
Right.
And if you would like some information on how to improve your executive presence online, I know we're not really covering it here, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you some tips like what to do with your camera, where you should be on the screen, your microphone and things like that. Did I see a question over here? Thank you.
I think we're talking a little bit around my question. We're talking about how you set culture with your staff and in your organization. I'm curious, how do you handle, and this might be too specific, but how do you handle when rumors bubble up within your staff? And you, as the chief executives, I know you hold a lot of information and often you can't explain, well, I made X decision because, and you can't always share all the becauses. How do you, so that I guess maybe the question is overarching communication, but how do you handle it when there's a conflict such as a rumor or something that's like distracting?
It's a great question.
So given the reach out and read, I have to recommend a book called Generations, written by Gene Twangy. Has anybody read that book? All my board has read it. All my VPs have read it. I've given away a couple hundred copies. And it's about why each generation is so different. And Gen Z drives me crazy. And as a boomer, I didn't understand it at all. So she explains through data why Gen Z expects more transparency from me. When I started, it was like, the boss said this, it's like, yes sir, we're going to go off and do this, and that was that. Now they expect to participate in the decisions and to at least to know why you made the decision. And some of these things are confidential and you can't say that.
Can be difficult.
Let me just repeat that so people that are behind you can hear you. So Enid's question was, with regards to generations, how can you present or project executive presence to the different generations? Did I capture that correctly?
And for people who probably don't value that, but you have to maintain your position in your role.
Okay. Any of you want to answer that one?
She's my general counsel. I'm not sure how to do this. But I will share with you a story. Again, I think stories are so powerful. This is a true story, and it just happened a couple weeks ago. So we...
Don't say any names.
Like a lot of companies, and it's too bad we don't have time to talk about remote work, because I think we all have a lot of opinions about it. We went remote, which is... For some employees, obviously, you can't have open heart surgery remotely. As Byron was saying, you can't build a building remotely. But for some percentage of our staff, we went remote, and we started doing new employee orientation online. So I was a new employee. I went through it. I was horrified because it was so, it gave me no sense of the culture. It gave me nothing. Anyway, we started new employee orientation, and I realized, I have a new window into the people that are coming to work for us. And lo and behold, I'm doing new employee orientation 2 weeks ago, and I look up, and there's a lot of people, 60 or 70 people, and there's a man with a very large nose ring, not like a little dot, not a little hoop, but like a bowl thing. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? Why does he look like that? It's his first day of work. And I don't know, could he remove it? And then I sort of had to step back and say, I can't bring that to, I have to get that thought out of my head. And I really can't look in that direction anymore. I'm so distracted. But I did think, hey, we need to set some norms around appearance, because we have patients who judge our competency around appearance, and they may be old or they may be more conservative than some of the employees that we have, and so it's a little bit of a struggle because it's hard getting employees now, as we all know. And how we moderate, I guess, is where I'm going to get to with Enid's comment, how we moderate what might have been traditional expectations with the way people want to live their lives. So it's not really an answer, but we're going to work on it.
George, Byron, what's that?
I think with the different generations, so I have everything from a 17-year-old to a 72-year-old, working for us, and I notice in my style, I will approach people differently. But the common theme, though, I still think goes back to what's going on in people's lives outside of work.
Yeah.
Honestly, work is such a small piece of what's really going on, and I find that, I don't know if I call it executive presence, but it's just a connection with people about their children, about something going on in their lives, so I do burritos with Byron. I do this out on the job sites, and I go around the table and I ask everybody, but hey, what do you like to do outside of work? What's your hobbies? Like, what do you, and it's really interesting to hear, and I have a translator, but guys that love to garden, or love to ride horses, or love to paint, or play the saxophone, and when you look at these guys on a construction site, you're like, wow, I never would have thought that, but that makes a connection that I just think goes a long, long way, and I try to remember that, when I see them again. So,
I have a thing called breakfast or lunch with George. So we're about 25% Gen Z and 50% millennials, so a lot of young folks work there. So people just sign up and we sit down, and 6 people, and I have breakfast in my office or lunch. And I start off with, I want you to tell me your journey, your life journey. Right from the time, where'd you grow up? And we just talk about each one of them individually. And then I say, okay, we can talk about whatever the heck you want to talk about. Broncos, or you ask me anything you want. And so we spend an hour and a half just connecting with each other personally. And not everybody gets to do it because not everybody feels comfortable doing that. But the word gets out that he's not such a bad guy. You probably approach him and ask him stuff.
Great.
They'll be a lot more comfortable to ask you something that's tough,
right?
After at least getting to know them a little bit.
And I'll be much more appreciative of why they ask that if I understand where they came from.
Good.
Their life story.
That's good. That's what we call psychological safety. And hopefully you can see the theme, and you can see where executive presence has changed. It's no longer the person that walks into the room and commands all the attention. It's the person, as we're seeing here, that walks into the room and has that warmth and that humility and the vulnerability that that people gravitate towards, and that they can show the vulnerability to. We don't have time for any more questions, unfortunately, because I know there were some other hands up. So I want to thank you, and Amanda, would you mind closing us out?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Hi, all. I'm Amanda Raker-Kimmelman, and I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. I'm continually impressed by our Colorado business community and the willingness to collaborate, to be authentic. These amazing, esteemed leaders that are willing to share their stories with us their humility. And as a very young Gen Xer, it gives me a lot of promise and hope for our future that our current leaders are willing to consider the needs of the various generations in the workplace. I work with Mercer, and we're very proud to sponsor Executive Voices. We are trusted partners to businesses in all things human capital. So when it comes to your people, we would love to talk with you and support you. And thank you, Anna, for letting us be a part of Executive Voices. And thank you all for being here tonight.
And FirstBank and Shannon, so
Yeah,
thank
Shannon,
you.
Thank you for hosting us in this lovely space.
Yep. Oh, before I forget, thanks to Molly's suggestion, I have a few copies of, I wrote a book actually on finding your executive voice. If you're interested, I have a few copies, so thank you, Molly, for that suggestion. Feel free to come up and grab them. I'm really bad about talking about my stuff, which is really not good, I know. But if you want it, I've got them for you. Otherwise, have a beautiful rest of your evening, everybody.
Thanks.